Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A for the film Wood on Water. My name is Joanne Parsant. I am the Director of Education for the California Film Institute. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white 50-something woman with round, dark-rimmed glasses and short, light brown curly hair. I'm wearing a black shirt and silver hooped earrings. I am sitting in a home office with a bookshelf on one side of me and a printer and a vase of lilacs on the other. It is my great pleasure to welcome our special guest, the director of Wood on Water, Hannah Maya.
Hello, hi there. So I'm Hannah Maya. I'm a 30-something, late 30-something young woman, and I've got blonde, curly, shoulder-length hair, and I'm also sitting in my my office at home.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you also to Pat, our ASL interpreter, for joining us as well. So just to start off, Hannah, how did you first learn about Keewaydin, and how did you know you wanted to make a film about the camp and about this particular group of young women?
Sure. Well, initially I had a film called My Big White Thighs and Me, which basically screened in Colorado at another film festival. And I was out there for that in Colorado. And then when I got home, I got an email out of the blue from a lady called Max, who had been at that festival. And she kind of said, I'd like to tell you about this place. My daughter's been part of it, and it's kind of wonderful and magical. And I think your way of storytelling might fit making something about this place. So really just there. And that was about 2018.
Wow. That's so great when something like that sort of is just handed to you and falls in your lap as a film option. So minor detail, but in the film you talk about Keewaydin as an American summer camp, but it's based in Canada. So I'm just wondering why it's not a Canadian summer camp.
Yeah, I suppose most of the teenagers, most of the people that go, and most of the people that work there are actually American,
Okay.
and I think they're all part of the US kind of summer camp association. But yeah, they're proud of their Canadian kind of lakes and things as well.
Having gone to summer camp as a kid, it's just like it didn't occur to me that I could have gone to Canada, which seems just so amazing. So from the very opening words of the film, when one of the staff members, Demi Mathias, says that Canada was built on the back of a canoe, you automatically kind of acknowledge the legacy of the First Nations people, not just in the practice of canoe tripping, but in the very founding of the Canadian nation. You could probably just easily say that Canada was built on the backs of Indigenous people. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of that history to the story and how Keewaydin ensures that hopefully they do, that their campers understand and honor it? And is that like incorporated into their program before the girls even start their journey, that, the background of the Indigenous culture?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was huge to get that in and to just mention it, because I think you can kind of think that canoeing is for, middle-aged white guys who like to fish, what have you. But I think it's really important to acknowledge it's far more than that, far bigger than that. And it goes back so much further. Keewaydin was 125 years old when I was filming. So that was kind of like, I was thinking about that and why they were tripping in that way. And so that's how I found out about their traditional kind of the gear that they use. But then it just made me think, but why are they tripping this way? And then to think further about like the Indigenous communities and how they passed on what they knew, and to go back even further. I do think, the Keewaydin community definitely have an acknowledgement of it. I think there's probably even more work to be done in some ways to really make that understood. But the way that they do have these guides, some of the first guides were from the Indigenous communities, and they also have people coming who live on native lands nearby, who also come on and trip on the Keewaydin program. And they have a lot of old pictures and a lot of history hanging on the walls around the camp. So, if you want to delve into any of it, it's all this history is just hanging around you. You can kind of find out more.
So when they're tripping and they're like when they're about to venture out on some of their bigger paddles, so a couple times you showed them doing sort of the sacrifices to sort of get this. Was that something that came to them from Indigenous culture, and is that sort of part of that practice?
Yeah, it is. And it's funny that I was, that's one of the main bits for me about including that in the film, of like appropriation and kind of just respect and acknowledgement. And I was wondering how that was going to sit with people, but it was done by the girls in a very kind of like yeah, it was kind of acknowledging where they'd come from, and I felt it was important, and it was kind of fun for the girls, but also, yeah, exactly, knowing that link. You know, we
Right.
talked about it. It would be a point of conversation that you could talk about, kind of like who had tripped here before, and like, and where things had come from, why they were doing it that way.
That's great. So what made you decide to take part in the canoe tripping experience yourself and to make that part of the film?
Yeah, so I mean, instinctively, my kind of way of filming is a bit like that. Like I talked about, my previous film was called My Big Wet Thighs and Me, and that was shot by myself, and it was about coming to terms with my body image after a recent miscarriage and swimming in cold water, and it was me filming myself. And making that story. So it is an instinctive way that I kind of film and tell a story. I hadn't actually planned to be as big a part in this film as I ended up becoming. I think with filmmaking, you have to roll with it quite sometimes, and things don't go to plan. I had actually hired a filmmaker to be on the trip with the girls the whole time, and then that kind of fell through. But by that time, I was in Canada and committed, and so it was just clear that I had to step into being on the trip a lot more than I had initially planned. I was going to be on the trip a little bit, but also filming on the island and things. So yeah, at the base camp.
Were you ever tempted to try and do the whole trip?
Yeah. Oh, really? It was only my 2.5-year-old son that stopped me from doing that, to be fair. Yeah, you know, and I think perhaps it would have made a better film if I had been, but you have to, again, you know, it's not what I committed to, and not that, but then my family came out, so Patrick, my husband, and my son came out, and then I thought, yeah, I've got to stick this to the end. So in the end, I was on it was a 6-week trip, and I was on the trip with them for 4 weeks. So yeah.
Did you worry at all about what you were missing in between and feel that it would be problematic in how you put the film together?
Yeah, definitely. And I, like I say, I didn't ever really plan on being part of the film as much. I mean, the one thing with the teenagers is that they were so eager for this film to be made and this story to be told, and so proud to be part of it. But then that's the difference in the reality of when you get there and you're filming and you're putting a camera in their faces. You know, I mean, trying to be respectful about it, but. And obviously for me, it's quite important to get some of those early bits where the girls are struggling, you know, because it's this transformational arc that I knew by the end of the 6 weeks they were going to be so slick and brilliant. And I obviously had more confidence in them. They were really quite struggling with this thought of it. And then for me to then be filming them and wanting to get some of those mishaps on camera, you know, it was a little bit uncomfortable at times at the beginning. And then obviously I had to come out after a week, and I thought, well, it was a good time to let them just solidify their processes, and then, but I just didn't want them to be too slick when I came back in. But it was great, yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the young women in the film, where they come from, what tends to draw them to this kind of camp, and like what you think their primary motivations are for taking on, you know, this kind of an adventure?
Yeah, sure.
Or if they'd even done this kind of like extreme wilderness adventure before?
So they can do with it being a camp, they can join when they're kind of 11, I think it is. So there's some of them will have been like their 4th year on doing this kind of canoe tripping. And I think it mentions in the film some of the girls had been the year before, and it was a lot more like type 1 fun, a lot more sunbathing and playing cricket with their bats, and you know, and then this one, it was definitely more taking it. It's the first time where they go into northern Quebec, where it's a lot more insects, it's a lot colder, and it's a lot more intense. So it's known, it has a sort of a mythical kind of thing as being the hardest trip they'll do within the Keewaydin, and everyone knows this section trip almost is the hardest trip, and so they're working towards it. And you know, some of the girls are scared by it, as I say, but there was one girl on this trip that had never done any Keewaydin tripping before, and you saw her at the beginning struggling with putting the wanigan on her head, you know, and it shows it how it was a real getting in there, that she just had to roll with it. So it pulls in all sorts of people. A lot of the people are families that have their brothers and fathers may have gone to Keewaydin. There's definitely a strong history there, but I think they're trying to, you know, trying to let girls know about it being something that they can do. And they're on from all over America. So there was people from Massachusetts, people from Vermont, but also people from California, LA and San Francisco.
So was there ever a situation where it was just too much for a camper to manage? I mean, maybe not even on this trip, but do they, like, I'm just wondering sort of how they manage them, if, you know, if they never, like, because I think if I went and I never had that kind of experience, it just seems like it would be so daunting. And obviously they proved to be so strong and resilient, but, you know, do they, how much training do they get, you know, preparation before they go? And if something does go awry, you know, if they have sort of a, you know, a safety valve for that to help them out.
Sure. Oh, I think most of them, unless there's, I mean, I'm not fully sure on how they choose their participants for each trip, but to be on this kind of trip, they would really know that you're a real kind of, you must be very physically fit. You must be kind of into your outdoor sports if you've not done any of the other key wading trips before to get on something like this. Otherwise, they're learning these skills in the years before. You know, there's a lot of fun on them, but they're also learning how to chop down trees, and they're learning all those skills necessary. And I suppose they know they're building a team. So if they have got someone, they're not going to put like 5 newbies on one group, you know, so they kind of can see how it all balances out. But I think, no one, I mean, people cried on the trip, you know, people find it really hard, but no one kind of needed to be, you know, like pulled out. You saw, in fact, Cielo there, she ended up going back in after getting, dislocating her shoulder. She was so eager and so disappointed to be having to wait to go back in. But, you know, it was float planes to where we are. So you have to get a float plane in and out, which aren't cheap, and are quite a commitment to organize, and logistics with the group that are already on the, you know, to make sure you don't stop them from progressing. So there's quite a lot of logistics, not an easy thing to come in and out.
Right.
And also the base camp can't phone in to the group. So it's only if the group have an emergency they can make some kind of like emergency text message or some kind of communication text message back to base camp. But base camp could not just kind of like, yeah. So it's remote, and it's, you know, yeah, you feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really amazing to see her. She's like, yeah, I dislocated my shoulder, but I couldn't wait to get back in there, you know, and just start lifting things again. It was really incredible to see that dedication. But you can see how like an amazing team they've created by that point. I mean, I did notice that, you know, most, obviously, if not all of the girls in the film appear to be white. So I'm just, I'm wondering if you can just talk a little about the issues around accessibility for this kind of outdoor camp. You know, do you see a way to make these experiences available to a more diverse population of young people, and what impact you think that might have? You know, I mean, I think that's often the case with a lot of outdoor activity, you know, and how we get, you know, more communities of color and, you know, or other communities that don't generally have access to those kind of camps, how, you know, if there's any, if Keewaydin does anything like that, or, you know, or how we think we might be able to improve on that.
Sure. They certainly do have, I don't. Again, I should have fully brushed up on that, on how Keewaydin run it, but they do have various programs to get. I think in America there's something called Bright Stars, where they kind of work with some schools to get sponsored programs, sponsored places. I know there was a couple of girls on this trip that have come from that kind of way. So it's not that because these are very expensive places in the grand scheme to take one of these. So yeah, there is a lot of privilege on this trip, and that was certainly one of my concerns with the film as well. It was like, but the Keewaydin are trying, and yeah, like I say, they had these couple of girls that came on, and they also have the to get like Indigenous people on as well, to keep that heritage. And so they're trying, but there's definitely work to be done, you know. It's overwhelmingly kind of white privileged American, but
I think it's the case with a lot of camps like that.
Yeah,
not just Keewaydin. Along seeing how one of the staff members did identify as being Indigenous, and I'm just wondering if that's something that they do encourage as far as having, you know, members of First Nation communities from Canada, or even, you know, Native American communities from the U.S., if they're encouraging them as guides and camp leaders as part of that process.
Yeah, I mean, they want all, especially the girls program is kind of like feels quite alive and quite, you know, like they're really kind of pushing and just want any of the girls to they have like this competition that's kind of like the gun that's out on the water when they come back, and then it's like showing off your paddling skills. And that Demi, who we saw at the beginning of my film, kind of won that when she was not a leader she is now, but when she was one of the teenagers. And it's kind of like legendary because she was one of the first girls to win, because it was just against everyone in the camp, and everyone was like, Demi, she was kind of legendary to people. So there's some respect there. It's like, yeah, she's got the skills. That kind of thing.
So is there a boys camp that's going on simultaneous to that, or there are boys trips that are happening at the same time that the girls trips are happening?
The same time, yeah. So on base camp, it's all mixed when they're there, but I mean, really, they're there for one night at the beginning and 2 nights at the end. So it's and then they're out for like their 6 weeks. But it's a single sex program when they're actually tripping. So, but they get to exchange a lot of ideas. So the leaders will talk to the leaders of both kind of the guys and the girls. But actually on trip it's just single sex programs, which is actually I really appreciated. As I was 38 when I was on that program. I don't think I'd really ever done an all women's trip, and it was kind of I really embraced it. It was good.
What do you think is the most valuable thing about that experience of it just being all female?
I think on some ways you can just relax a bit more, just be more vulnerable. And I think you don't have to, I think also sometimes you're not having to, you witness the girls not, they stepped up to it. They don't, you can't just be like, I think if there was guys there, maybe you just kind of let the guy haul the canoe out of the difficult patch of water, perhaps. But there's less of that, you just work as a team. And, one beautiful moment in the film is where the girls are all like fire lining the canoe and they're passing it from one to the other because the ground's all treacherous to carry it. And I'm guessing on one of the guys, it would have taken a lot less guys, or one guy might have slung it on his head and tried to do it a bit more brute strength, whereas this is just pure teamwork required, and they work really slickly that way.
So what were some of the challenges of filming in the wilderness and on the water?
Yeah, it was challenging. I had a lot more gear than I ended up using, or some more gear than I ended up using. In my Wanigan was a lot of film stuff, but it was raining a lot of the time, like just on and off drizzle. So kind of anything electronic, I had a steady cam with me, anything electronic, you just couldn't be sure was going to get wet or what have you. The girls were also, in that whole time, so I was there for 4 weeks. We only had one afternoon off, in which time I tried to set up an interview with one of the teenagers. And it was an hour interview in which a thunderstorm came rolling over us twice in that time, so I had to throw my coat over the camera and we dived under the tarp. So it was challenging, and I was just basically trying to film as I went. There was a lot of handheld stuff. Mics were kind of difficult. I had onboard mic, but it wasn't a time for really slick filmmaking. It was a time for embracing the fact that I was like in the middle of it with them, and I could get that footage for being on the go rather than like this, like I say, slick, beautiful filmmaking in that way.
But so can you talk a little about the way then you chose to put the film together and the tone you were wanting to achieve, particularly with the use of the animation? I just love the sort of the whimsical nature of the animation that you used, and how you decided to, once you had that footage of the best way to tell that story.
Yeah, the animations was, I always had that in my head from the beginning. It just felt like it's almost like I wanted like a teenage journal type. That's what I was kind of going for. So there's the I think there's the history of the camp that I tried to tie in, that manliness and kind of the ethos and could women do it, and then I was kind of also trying to tie in those traditional elements of heritage canoe tripping and the Wanigans and the tump lines and then the wood canvas canoes. And then obviously, like I said before, if you're thinking about those elements, you have to go back even further in time and acknowledge the bigger picture and the land and why are we tripping in that way, given the indigenous people. And then it's the actual tripping themselves of the experience of the teenage girls. which I was hoping that they might talk a bit more on camera than they actually did, but I think we see a lot of it, you know, and it was hard when they're laughing. Again, I talk about my mics, there's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of, you know, they're 16 and they're just chattering, and it's hard to get what they're saying on camera sometimes. There's a lot of laughter that you just wasn't able to put in the film. But then there's my perspective as well, which again was slightly unplanned, but I felt like I needed to talk to camera I felt like these girls were making it look pretty easy on some level, and it wasn't. I mean, they would also be crying and they would also be struggling, but they were making it look easy, and so I felt like if I include myself, it would help the audience appreciate it's difficult.
Just how hard it really was.
Yeah.
I would say it was the bugs alone that looked like it, you know, like I could even fathom all the rest of it, but the bugs just seemed like so challenging.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering of how you balance, you know, being there with the girls and getting their, you know, kind of filming their experience, but also not getting in their way, you know, and sort of just where you found that balance of kind of being part of the team, but not being part of the team, and trying to find, you know, the best way to kind of, you know, gauge that.
Sure. I think I'm like a slow burn. So I just kind of gave them a lot of time initially and kind of not in their face so much. Once I'd got those few difficult moments where I felt like I had to get, which might have made them feel a bit uncomfortable, I then focused on just letting them have the space to be comfortable a bit more, which then gave me a little bit of anxiety of like, am I getting the shots that I need? You know, am I giving them too much space? I'm going to finish this and not have enough. So I had to perhaps up it a little bit, but that worked. You know, there's some, you know, when you're falling in bog and you're up to your waist, there's just some kind of like some friendship that forms anyway, whatever ages you are. You know, sometimes I definitely felt old when they're talking about culture and like you know, things they're watching and doing, and that it's just not part of what my life, you know. So I definitely felt different to them. As I say in the film, actually, I felt very much different to them, but also completely the same as them as well. Yeah.
Can you talk about how they feel about the film? I'm assuming that you shared it with them and they've seen it. Just wondering how they feel about how it turned out.
Yeah, really, I'm really chuffed. I think really, you know, I've had more from some of the girls and everyone said they love it, but then, you know, I've had more feedback from some of the girls than the others. Yeah, and I think they've been nervous primarily with sharing it with the Keewaydin community. It feels like kind of like that's where their nerves grew like from. And it's been a strange one being in this pandemic kind of year, because we've not been able to screen it together to watch collectively, which is a shame, you know. But hopefully they're hoping to get back on the island this summer, so that will be a nice chance for them if that happens, to kind of, you know, to do that.
Have you spoken with them since the trip just to sort of get a sense of what they took away from their experience? Like, did you talk to them after the fact, like once they were completely done, and kind of processing how it impacted them personally?
Not so much. In some ways, I don't go into this in the film, but this is section 2 trip is basically their next trip is supposed to be section 1, where they actually paddle to Hudson's Bay. So this was sort of like a trip where they felt, like I said, it was mythical in how hard it was. But then their glory year is supposed to be after that, where it's sort of like is very hard, but they've already done lots of it. They know they can do it, and they paddle into Hudson's Bay. But the pandemic last year was their year for doing that, so they didn't do that. So I mean, they totally felt proud of themselves without a doubt. Yeah, it's just a bit strange for them not having that. You know, I think some of the girls are definitely hoping to do it this year, but they're getting older. You know, it's a few years when you're 16 and 18. It's kind of you're moving on with your experiences.
Right. So is this the kind of adventure or wilderness experience you'd want your own children to undertake? And if so, what would you want them to get from it?
Yeah, sure. I have so I have a 4-year-old now and a 4-month-old, both of them little boys. But yeah, I'd love them to do a trip like this. At the end of the when we get back to the island, the girls and the guys have a chance to kind of around a big flat campfire share their stories, like a story with each other. And I think it's easy to think of the guys' version of this as being a bit kind of macho, but actually it seems that they get differences. Like what was really warm about the guys' stories was just how, again, about not the macho-ness and the kind of, but just really how they connected with each other more emotionally and things. So I'd love that if my sons wanted to do something like that and kind of get close to a small knit group. The friendships that they make, I think they'll go on to keep for the, potentially for the rest of their life. So
it's a pretty big bonding experience being out there in the middle of nowhere. So what would you most like viewers, particularly other teens or young people, we have both male and female, we have, a bunch of students watching this program. What would you want them to take away from the film?
Wow, that's a good one. I should have. I think it's just, I think it's really about resilience, isn't it? This one, about we're capable of so much more than sometimes we think we are, and they're kind of getting through it. And then that idea of like being in nature, taking yourself out of society for a little bit, for a few weeks, if you're able to do that, how magical that can be. And if how I wish we all had opportunities to do that. Kind of turn off your Instagram and your what have you, and just be out there and then allow yourself to be vulnerable, allow yourself to be sweaty and bitten, and you just get down to the fundamentals of you, and you're surrounded by other people doing exactly the same, and there's tears and there's ridiculous jokes that don't make sense to anybody else, and it's just, it's brilliant. So I suppose if they could do something like that, that's what I'd like them to do.
Yeah, I think we would all like something like that to some degree. So what are you working on now?
So I'm kind of on maternity looking after my son, but I have this other film. I've been kind of working with a lady who is she's got 2 grown-up children, and she lives in Vermont, and she is really into ice swimming. So kind of, like really every day she goes kind of swimming and chopping out holes in the ice, and it's helped her through the pandemic. And so I've been doing some of that, as for my other film. I do a bit of swimming, but I'm just very interested in kind of women and stages of life. So she's an older lady, and I'm 40 this year, and we've kind of been making it over the last winter and then into this next year. And it's kind of dealing with, so through this swimming and cold water swimming, and how it can help us find creativity, and how it can help us get through a pandemic, and how you can make friendships and social interactions through social media, even when we can't virtually meet, and hugs and things like that. Sort of that.
Well, I hope we will get a chance to see it in the near future.
Thank you.
At the next festival. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Hannah. Thank you so much for your film. Thanks for joining us, and good luck on your current project.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, take care.